BionicDance is filmed in front of a live studio audience.
Hitchens Razor, the famous statement from Christopher Hitchens in a 2003 article, has become the slogan of many atheists and skeptics. What can be asserted without evidence can also be dismissed without evidence. At first glance, this seems reasonable and intuitive. However, when reality meets Hitchens Razor, it's not hard to see that this is perhaps the dullest philosophical razor ever put forward in the history of skepticism.
That's only true if you don't know what Hitch was actually saying, like this kid. Let's do this. Greetings, fellow space travelers, BionicDance here. I'm still a little pissed off with Christopher Hitchens for dying on my birthday. Worst present ever. But of the so-called four horsemen of atheism, he was definitely my favorite. Kinda still is, really. His quick wit, biting humor, and amazing logic made him a joy to watch and helped shape my own thinking, my own arguments, and I miss him dearly. Now this little schmendrick is going to claim that one of Hitch's most well-known arguments doesn't work, but it's going to quickly become clear that he doesn't even understand the basics.
In applying the rules of logic and argumentation, we see that Hitchens Razor commits two obvious fallacies. The first problem and the first fallacy committed is the fallacy fallacy. This is committed when you reject a conclusion because it is argued for in a fallacious manner. One can argue for a true or false conclusion with a bad argument, but that doesn't warrant a dismissal of the conclusion.
Right, but Hitchens Razor doesn't do that. It says that what is asserted without evidence can be dismissed in the same manner. It's saying that if the person making the claim doesn't give us a way to test it by giving us evidence, then the claim has no merit and can be discarded. The claim might even be correct, but there's no reason to discuss it as presented. This would have been made obvious with even the most cursory of searches, with only the tiniest bit of reading, which this kid has obviously not done. Hell, I could end the video right here, but let's see what else he comes up with.
For instance, I might argue that the Earth is flat, and I might make my case by dismissing all contrary evidence because it comes from a corrupt government. In this instance, I'd be committing the ad hominem fallacy. But that doesn't mean that the Earth isn't flat, it just means that I've argued for it in the wrong way. If you'd like to reject the flat Earth model, you'd have to provide an argument of your own against it, not just appeal to my fallacious argument.
But again, Hitchens Razor isn't suggesting one dismiss the flat Earth model. I mean, it's still idiotic, but that's not the point. Rather, it addresses your bad argument. You've asserted that the Earth is flat and provided no evidence, so we reject your assertion. Let me emphasize that. We reject your assertion, and will continue to do so until you've improved it. Even if you're right, your argument is wrong, and that's what the Razor is cutting.
The second problem and the second fallacy committed by Hitchens Razor is the fallacy of shifting the burden of proof. The burden of proof is the obligation in argumentation to provide reasons or justifications for the proposition you're defending. If I'd like to argue that Hawaiian pizza is spawn of Satan, though I think this is self-evident, I have an obligation to give reasons and justification for that claim. I have a burden of proof. To shift the burden of proof is to neglect it by putting it on someone else. That person may or may not have a burden of proof of their own, but to have a burden of proof, yet claim only your opponent does, is to commit the fallacy of shifting the burden of proof.
That would only be true if both sides were making a claim about the conclusion, but they're not. You are making a claim about Hawaiian pizza, but the wielder of the razor is only critiquing your argument. Suppose they agree with you that Hawaiian pizza is the spawn of Satan, but part of your reasoning is that Satan spews pineapples from his nose like boogers. They can say they don't believe you, and with good reason. You have no evidence. Why do you think this, and why should someone accept it? They still think Hawaiian pizza is the spawn of Satan, but they're under no obligation to believe your claim about demonic nostril projectiles without good proof. You might both agree that ham is flakes of Satan's dandruff and can prove it with evidence, but you're still on the hook regarding the pineapples. That's not shifting the burden of proof. That's simply showing that you don't have any.
If I stood up to a podium, asserted the satanic nature of pineapple pizza, and substantiated it by saying, "Prove to me that there's no demonic presence within this pizza," I'd be shifting the burden of proof. I'd be putting it on someone else even though I have it.
But again, not what's happening. Prove to me that there is demonic presence in this pizza. You said there is. Show it to me, or I'm gonna keep going about my day as if you've never said a damn thing. Wow, all of a sudden I sound stuffed up. Did I do that to myself by pretending to have nostril cannons? Weird.
Now, it's often thought that if you are rejecting a claim, you don't have the burden of proof because you're not actually making a claim. However, rejecting a claim is still making a claim because you are negating the claim. That's making a claim to its negation.
You make a claim. I ask why I should accept it. You say, because reasons. I say, not good enough. That's Hitchens Razor. I don't have to say that your claim is wrong, I just have to say that your argument is bogus.
If I make the claim A, I am making the negation of the claim non-A. And if I claim non-A, I am making a negation of the claim A. All claims require rejecting their opposites, and so just because you're rejecting something doesn't mean you aren't making a claim. So, in the instance of Hitchens Razor, you are making a claim even though you're dismissing one.
Dismissing a claim is not the same as saying it's wrong. If you say that A is true because of X, if X is only an a priori argument, if it presumes the conclusion without examination or analysis, then X is a bad argument for A, and can thus be dismissed without any burden. A might even be right, but until you come up with an a posteriori argument, an argument based on observation or experimental data, your reasoning is invalid, and so your conclusion need not be accepted. Those of you who already understand these concepts will have noticed that I'm just repeating the fuck out of myself, and I realize that. But I'm trying to say it in different ways in the hopes that if one didn't make sense, then another might. Hey kid, if you're watching this, don't just argue against one of the things I've said. Listen to them all and try to find the common threads here, and maybe you'll see why you don't get Hitchens Razor. Hell, some of your logic is actually reasonable, but you're not arguing against Hitchens Razor because that's not what it's saying.
If we are justified in dismissing all claims without evidence, we have a problem. There are certain things that are undeniably true that have no evidence supporting them and couldn't have any evidence supporting them. The principles of thought are all undeniably true, yet there's no evidence supporting them that doesn't ultimately rely on them. The law of non-contradiction states that contradictory claims can't be simultaneously true in the same sense. There's no way to prove this, though. I may try to and say, well, hang on a second. This book, the greatest book of all time, this amazing book, it makes no sense to say that this book can simultaneously exist and not exist. But I've already assumed the law of non-contradiction in order to make that statement. It's true, even though it can't be proven.
But for Hitchens Razor to be applied, we don't have to prove anything. We just have to give evidence for the claim. I'm working on a new animated character. I could, if I recorded its creation, show a time when it existed and when it didn't. That's at least evidence that there are times when something has existed and when it hasn't, and that those times were not the same time. Even if that doesn't prove the law of non-contradiction, it's at least some evidence. It gives us something to argue about. It's more than just saying, because I said so, and is thus not vulnerable to Hitchens Razor.
In mathematics, postulates are assumed to be true because there's no way to prove them but no way to deny them. The reflexive property states that x is equal to x. Even though this is true, there's no evidence supporting this. I may try and give evidence for this by saying, well, hang on, any value is identical to itself. If it wasn't, it wouldn't be that value. But just as with the law of non-contradiction, I've already assumed the property in attempting to prove it.
And yet, we can demonstrate how certain values interact with each other. 1 plus 1 equals 2. 1 and 2 are labels for certain values, not the values themselves. We can demonstrate that if we have more than the value we call 2, or less than it, the value we do have no longer fits the value we've chosen to call 2. Again, we're asserting with evidence, and thus Hitchens Razor does not apply to our argument. Even if we're wrong, even if this isn't proof, we've still defined our terms and described our reasoning, then demonstrated ways that our reasoning can be applied. Hitchens Razor cannot be used to dismiss our claim, even if it's false.
Now let's apply Hitchens Razor to itself. Let's forget all the other issues, assume it's true, and see where it takes us. What we find is that Hitchens Razor is self-contradictory in two separate ways. The fourth problem and the first way in which Hitchens Razor is self-contradictory is the contradiction between the first and second half of the statement. This is similar to the second problem of shifting the burden of proof, but even if we reject that external notion of a burden of proof, left only with Hitchens' logic or the lack thereof, we have a similar but distinct and more obvious issue. If that which can be asserted without evidence can also be dismissed without evidence, then that's the problem. Those two statements are incompatible with each other. As mentioned earlier, a claim negating another claim is still a claim, and if that negation is made without evidence, it's just an assertion without evidence.
You don't understand Hitchens Razor.
And finally, the fifth problem, the second way in which it is self-contradictory, the most obvious and devastating problem with Hitchens Razor. It is entirely self-defeating. If we forget all of the other issues and accept every word of Hitchens Razor as true, we're forced to reject all of it. If that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence, then we have to ask the obvious question. Can Hitchens Razor be asserted without evidence? Not only can it be, since anything can be asserted without evidence, not only has it been, courtesy of Hitchens himself who never bothered to substantiate his point, but there is no evidence that could ever support Hitchens Razor. There is no way to prove Hitchens Razor because it claims to be the basis for assessing truth in the first place.
You don't understand Hitchens Razor.
Food for thought. If you enjoyed this video,
I didn't. Until next time, fellow space travelers, this is BionicDance saying don't run on automatic. Instead, please think. What can be asserted without everence? Suppose they agree with you that Hawaiian pizza is the spawn of Satan, but part of your reasoning is that Spaten. All alleged truths are vulnerable to potentials. We can demonstrate that if we have more than the... Shit. All right, there. Dewey, what the hell are you doing? Get out of the way!
Sandra, this isn't right. There has to be a better way to make money than taking these assassination contracts.
Like what? What do you have in mind?
Well, have you ever considered Patreon?
Patreon, where people donate money for those videos I'm in? Do you really think that'll pay the bills, Dewey?
Well, if people want to prevent a few international incidents, I'm sure they'll be willing to contribute. After all, what's $1 or $2 per video to forestall the occasional war, right?
Well, I suppose I could give it a try. You'd better be right about this.
Come on, Sandra, let's go home. Sandra!
What? He was right there. I'll start that Patreon thing tomorrow. Promise.
Vote me down and I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine.